All right. Let me start out the color studies video by thanking Robin B., Benjamin C., Stephen J., and Andrew S. for your for your very kind contributions, and for and for all of you throughout all this time. Several of you are recurring. Really much appreciated that support. All right. So let's just get right into our little world. This is Joshua S., who says, I just saw your newest video about overworking. I wanted to ask you something about it. I don't know if you're able to give any advice or make a video on this, but when I try to do little color studies, I feel I have a really hard time working small, and I don't know if there's a way to fix that issue. For example, I'm working on a small nude study, and the body looks fine, but I feel the face is an issue. I feel since it's so small that I'm having a hard time determining what's the important elements to put versus what's not. Maybe that's by the way, that's a right on the money kind of question right there. That's. Remember, this is a sketch moment when you're talking about these little studies, and they don't have to be color studies to come under the same sort of constraints. Yeah, in different ways, of course, depending on what the study's there for. So what's important, what's not? Maybe it's just me becoming a little too precious with the face, but I'm trying to convince myself that it's just a color study. I'm not sure if other people have trouble working small. When it's full size or somewhere around 16 by 20 inches, I don't have any issues. It's only when it's something smaller than that. I read the book on Gamel's studio and picked up the little note where he said not to work monkey size. So for most of my portraits now, I've been trying to keep it right around life size. But every once in a while, I just want to work small. So any advice would be appreciated. It'd be nice to get an opinion on this. Here we go, Joshua. There are a number of really important things that are coming up here. First of all, it matters that you know whether or not you're doing a color study. I mean, just a little study isn't the same thing as a color study. Color study has limits. It's there to just uncover the color scheme, shall we say. And and I say that I'm going to walk you through a bunch of, actually a fair number, for example, Layton's color studies. And you can see that that issue of eyes and things like that doesn't exist for somebody actually doing a color study. By the way, unless you're doing a large thing, but understand whether or not you're actually doing that. A color study implies rather a thumbnail model, and a sort of a sketch approach. So I'm just attacking this portion of this. You asked another question also, which I'll try to deal with in a different video. But for now, let's just begin to look at some pictures and talk about some of the points you're making and see if we can clarify the idea of a color study and the uses of things even like color studies, never mind as color studies. Let's see. Yeah, so when you say, I'm trying to convince myself that it's just a color study, it either is or isn't. That's my point on that one. All right. Yeah, and the size one, I don't want to get into that, but since you brought it up, we typically painted life size in the studio with Gamel. And you can hear in the commentary of Sargent and others that he was trying to paint the heads life size. And he said he had an issue with tending to gradually shrink them a bit as he went along. And you'll see that some of his heads appear to be something close to 8 heads high, but not a very common human thing. So that, yeah, the evidence is there that that's so. But nevertheless, that's just a phenomenon that has nothing to do with what we're talking about now. We're going to talk about color studies. So let's look at some pictures, see what we got. Now, the first ones, if you haven't seen them, and I could have shown you the finished versions of these, but this is Layton, and these are color studies. Now, he looks like he's actually put together a line drawing, and then he's put color into his drawings. There's a lot of drawing in this that might otherwise not be there. For a true color study, for a simple color study, you don't need that much drawing. So, and I'll show you some as time goes by. The one below is similar to that. It looks like it probably had a little bit of a drawing under it. And you see, by the way, when you see him gridding up paintings or gridding up the drawings for paintings, and you see other people at Puvis do that. You can then transfer those to all sorts of different sizes and just put together color in that drawing. In the days of Xerox machines, you could make multiple, a pile of line drawings and try different color schemes. I'll show you something I've done a little bit later. Not that, but something rather like that. So this is also, and the one on the right actually does suggest something more like a true, color study. But in other words, it's really sloppy it's not careful about the rest. And again, both Leighton's here again. So these are color studies. He's trying to secure a color scheme. And Leighton again, all right? And then we have Bouguereau doing the same thing. And again, it looks like he's got careful drawings underneath these things. The one on the right, I'm not even sure what that is. You can call it a color study, but I don't think that's a proper word for that. It is a study, though, but it's a more worked up study. But the one on the left, they refer to that as a color study. Let's talk about other color studies in the universe of color studies. Now, this is a thing that you might do. I've shown you this image before, something I did with Gamel. And you can see below that, I drew this thing. I actually made a little cutout of this arched sort of window shape. And so the upper one is probably about 16 inches high, maybe 15 inches high. And these other ones you can see are maybe less than 5 inches in height, probably 4. And so you can see each of these is a different color scheme. But yet I did it on the basis of showing the elements that were there. You can see it's not much more than 3 values, 3 colors for any of these, and you can see me trying different things out. So those are what I would call color studies. Those are just little adventures. And by the way, that's my exploratory nature. I like this. If I have nothing else to go by, I don't have a place that a wall this goes on where the colors are rather, shall we say, called for or required. I just simply do a lot of trial and error. I'm looking for the one that actually comes closest to my sort of concept when I did this. By the way, just for fun in talking about this, I had it in this figure in the background as an Apollo character. Actually, I think it's from a Greek sculpture that was floating around the studio. So I was in the days when I was doing this of still life painting and cast drawing. And so there's one of the goat, I think the middle goat there. Let's see if I can point to you. This one here and this figure here were both actual casts that I had in the studio. And I configured myself a Apollo theme. And then I decided, me being from the Southwest, as I think of it, Colorado, and I decided I would make it an Indian girl and goats, and sort of a Navajo maybe kind of a picture. And I decided to turn the Apollo figure with this music into a guardian figure with a bow. So it's a brave, an Indian brave, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just my poetic license. I didn't have a plan to do a particular theme. I just happened to have an Apollo figure there. And then I brought it home to made it personal for myself. But this is, as an impressionist, every single painting we lay in is a color study before it's a painting. The painting literally grows up out of the color study. Now you're talking just pure Monet thinking as well, and I told you about Brackman, but so each one of these things is first and foremost a color study. And no matter what you do as you go along into the drawing, you're never neglecting improving the color first in whatever area you might be drawing, and reviewing the grand unity of the color impression. So that's the thing to remember, though, that an impressionist, as I work, and these guys, as you can plainly see, these are both Tarbells. And you've seen these before, but you can see that they work on the basis of getting the colors moving, really getting the color scheme. So yeah, you could say these are all color studies initially. Hard one sometimes to believe, I suppose. Now, the bottom 2 pictures here are, you might call them pure color studies. What happened, this is part of it's demonstrations, very little teeny demonstrations for my composition workshop, where I'm trying to show people how to choose a color and then create a color scheme based on that. And I don't know what we had. I think in the case of this beach person, I forget what we had, whether we had this pink shirt or what we had exactly. And then we just searched out colors that would beautifully set that off. So this is an imaginative color scheme. We just made the color scheme up out of our head. And remember, when I'm teaching composition, I'm teaching you to create compositions. This isn't just composing still life things and talking about that, which is important, which is a factor in a lot of stuff. And so this is a similar one. I forget what was in this one, what the subject of it was. But this is just me taking some of the notes. And I always start with that note, which we can't compromise. That note, which we call the non-variable, right? The given note. So let's pretend this is a straw hat or something. I can't tell you what that was. And then the rest of that, where the values were already there in a values study, and there were some other indications of other colors, and it was moving in this direction, that kind of a warm picture. And I just began to move colors around, trying to find the beauty of the color, of a color impression. And so these are what you might call pure abstraction, which is, this really isn't a drawing here. But you can see there's not going to be any hands, eyes, noses, anything like that in this kind of a thing. It's just the larger color spots and the way they interplay. And but the one above it is another example. This is done in my workshop, the intensive workshop, where you can see plainly, I believe this is Mary Menefee's, and I showed it to you before, but where you can see how she's really working up the beauty of the color and not into little details about drawing. She's not even sucked in at all. And by the way, she or most of my students, that's not always been the case. That's a thing you have to learn to be strong and able about, right? How to talk about the major play and get that big color scheme on the board before you get moving too much. Yes, we do move significant effect play into it, not fairly quickly, rather, in the Boston School model. These sorts of places, you can see that sort of thing. But you can see that the early on phase of this thing, you could almost say that's just a color study. And these are a couple other ones. The bottom one's a demonstration by me, and so you can see again, there's nothing specific about the drawing in this kind of a study. So this isn't a sense. So don't think I'm being cute with words here. The Impressionist lay-in is a color study, and it doesn't go after lots of teeny little marks the way you're talking about your precious eyes, right? By the way, this is maybe a chance to talk a little bit about what we do draw. So there are strong players. You see things like this. These are significant effects and placeholders. These things, this one, that thing right there. But it's not like we're looking inside here and trying to know the petals on flowers and any of those kinds of things. We're actually able to stay big and just the grand ensemble. But in this case, by the time you get to the end and having the canvas covered, and this one's by a student of mine, so it's the same principle. By the time you get to the point of having the canvas covered in that several hour a day, by the way, this might be more than one day, but I am trying to get these guys working with me to think in terms of finishing the start, which doesn't employ every little bit of detail. On the other hand, it does set up all the major elements of the composition. Again, you can see the color relations and how that's treated down here. Larger color movements, value movements, all this stuff is trying to all be right. These great chromas, the richest chromas setting off, leading other things that might be lesser, in terms of the red family, for example. So I don't know what else I can tell you about that. But as I said before, every one of our lay-ins is a color study. It's wonderful in color as it evolves in drawing. And these are just some more. And I show you the one on the left or even all three of them, just to look at the idea of the head. Now this one is pushed. This is pushed now. It's beginning to move past being a start at this point. But and so these things like the eyes are in there. But what you're going to see with the handling of the eyes is it just has to do with the major play. Notice those things if you can up close. I can't pull this thing in for you. But notice what part of the eye actually plays and what part doesn't. There's a lot that's left out. But that's where I try to get you to think about the sketch model. So Gamble would say that the Sargent's approach to painting was a series of sketches. Well, what a sketch is about trying to get enough of the most significant kinds of events in the painting on the screen or on the drawing or wherever, so that it strongly suggests
the actual visual impression. And there's a certain laxity in in some ways. But it's meaning it's not trying to be careful, but it's got a very specific agenda. That's having all the horses pulling at once and having everything happening. So you talk about the great forms, the great color relations, the big color scheme, et cetera, et cetera. But that does include, at the end of the day, it includes the areas that are most, so we say, busy, like these kinds of areas. Even though, as you can see, this isn't worked up. In these kinds of areas, these things become, or even this area, these things become essential to actually making a first statement here. And that's the same thing here. This is the power stuff is here and right along through here. And then this is the busiest area of the painting. You can see why that's in there in a sketch, in a lay-in. That essentially suggests what the composition is. And that's what we do. So if you want to say that we sketch first, go ahead and say it. But this is so precise. This piece of forehead is never moving from this spot. And this exit this way and that. Things are set in stone here. And the power lights and all that sort of stuff, that's all being established right here at the beginning of the painting. So think of it as a color study in any case. But it's a color study that then moves in the correction of the color we're talking about. For example, you can say this is a given yellow in a blobby color study. That's what that'll look like. But when you actually want to know what color that is, you bring it close and nail the edge, and then you actually can see a whole lot more about the color because you put it in a very specific context. And that's true of its treatment anywhere else you may want it, you may actually look. So, and that's what I would call the completion of the color study. But it doesn't mean it's refined color. You can see this is broad movement color in here. When you do parts and things, there'll be a whole lot of variations of color within areas as you see form shifts and those sorts of things. So you see these are eyes, but you can see they're blobs, essentially blobs. There's a blueness to these eyes, but they're essentially blobs. And there's no cautiousness here. Now, we're trying to be precise about this, about certain other things, parts of this. You're trying to be precise where you find things that are very readable. You're trying to be quite precise so that the placement of these things is in hand. All right, but that doesn't mean it is more than a color study at this point, right? So this is Paxton. And again, if you just talk about a start, this does have the appearance of being a color study and more, right? And so my sense of this, based on looking at it, is that it has 3 layers and dry, whatever dry. My guess is it's 3 days worth of drawing painting. It could be less, but it's at least 2, and my guess is 3 based on what I've seen. So it's still in the class of what I call a start, right? In fact, that's why it was grabbed off his palette by the director of the museum school, because he wanted to have it, and purchased, of course, he wanted to have it as an example to students of a proper start. But you can see it's beautiful in color, right? The whole color scheme is on there. And then just a central drawing, or as I say, the articulation begins, right? It begins in certain places. You begin to become more articulate. So, yeah, let's move on. It's just that important, though. I brought in a scribble. It's probably going to shock you a little bit, but this is in the class right here of a color study. So I'm showing you this. I'm hoping it's not too glary, with the idea of having you understand what my lay-in looked like. That's right. This would have been what the lay-in looked like, but this is a color study. Now, is it just a color study the way we work? No, I'm actually trying to look and see if I like the idea of this composition. So, and I do this fairly routinely. Here's one. You still watching, Ollie? You'll recognize this one. I ought to give this one to you, actually. But here's one that Ollie purchased for his family over in England, and commissioned, shall I say. And but you can see this is a 2-hour, maybe 1.5 hour thing. And I'm just trying to see if I really want to compose what the composition is doing. So you see the sort of some leaves toward that side, and you'll see that they are smudges, essentially, maybe with a little bit of a leading edge, which is in that sketch model. the leading edge is a big help in sketching. If you want to be effective, you don't have to draw an eye, but you can make a smudge of value and then articulate one edge of it, the leading edge, what I call the leading edge. Every value blob has a leading edge. Let's keep going on this. So there's that one. I've showed you this before, but here again is the color study for it. I have a feeling this is going to be glary. Maybe not. But you see what I'm doing here, don't you? This is a study for a composition. It's sort of searching out, trying to find a composition. By the way, in the course of this study, you look at it. One of the things I try to do is I try to get to the idea of the three-dimensional. And by the way, look how big this is. It's almost, is that an 8 by 10? And I taped it off, by the way. Sometimes I do that if it's not going to be exactly an 8 by 10. And in this case, I had a canvas that I was going to use. And so I taped off the proportions of the canvas. It's also nice if you've never tried this before. I think it's a trick of illustrators and stuff to put tape around the edges. When you pull the tape off a white thing, it looks like a photograph, so it looks much more finished than certain, that even if it went out to the edges sometimes. But, so I hope you grasp there what I'm trying to do, though. I'm trying to set up a composition. So it's, in a certain way, it's reasonably close in drawing and all those things. Enough so to help me to know what I've got and determine by seeing it in the second dimension, fully drawn out, so you can actually see it not just in your mind and through a viewfinder, guessing, but actually see it on a two-dimensional panel. But again, that's a case where some of this is they're sort of bean counts of leaves, but it's just trying to show the essential aspects of these elements, right? And mostly color. It's done with color. So that's the model of drawing of laying in a picture, though, as a color study. Let's see. Do I have another one? I think I have I'm just going to show you a couple other studies, and this is in a class for sure for what it's worth. I wanted to show this in a different way. I'm just going to do it now this way. So these are color ideas for pictures that I have in mind, right? And I'm just going to show you several of them. Oh, let me show you this as well. This is so in this case, I'm working up a composition. This portrait was done, and I took the composition. I decided to put something in the background, and it was a Chinese screen that this delightful client had given to me, and I decided to. And because her picture and her husband's pictures wanted to be something of a pendant set, and his had a ship in the background. He was a shipbuilding family. And so I thought about this and this is my chance to actually create purely in the sense of a color value blocking, to create a little bit of an idea of that kind of a composition using the screen behind. So I do that. It's not uncommon for me to do it like that. At one point I had a commission to do a pastor and his wife. And this one has, this one was again, the same thing, an exploratory thing, but it is my first attempt at actually deciding what a color scheme ought to be. Okay, but it's a little more in the direction of what you saw in those color studies by Leighton. And then these are, I was coming up with this scheme based on the nude and an iris. So you'll see the purplish black iris in this picture, and I was thinking about doing some variations on the figure for a screen. And so you can see, again, these are color studies, but they're really the same. Each one is the same color, so they're more pose studies, if you follow what I'm saying. I'm going to show you these because they were there in the pile of stuff that I needed to show you. So hopefully that at least gets the idea across. Now let me go back for 2 seconds and just look at what the question was, and see what I've forgotten to tell you, if anything. I routinely think of one or two nice things to say after the fact, but I don't. I still won't. I don't want to put myself in the position of, writing up scripts. Scripts for these things. So you said, but when I tried to do little color studies, I feel I have a really hard time working small. Don't know if there's a way to fix that issue. Yeah, so one of the things I want to tell you about that in these studies, especially working small, remember the brush doesn't have two sides to it. And this applies to this brush stroke idea. A brush only has one useful side. You can't articulate two sides. For example, you showed in one of your pictures a blob of hair that went like that. And if you did that at one stroke, it would be a miracle. The sheer amount of nuance between the sharpness of one side and the relative losses of the other shifts, even if you could do it at a stroke, it wouldn't look very good. But when you realize that a brush, and this is where you're going to have to take me totally out of the blue, when you realize a brush only has one edge that you can articulate at a time, in a sense, it's really the same as a pencil. You're only drawing the dark part of a shape. When you're drawing a shape, the mark you make actually represents, logically at least, represents the dark part. So in this case here, it would represent, if I could do it, my light finger, my dark side of my finger against something light. There's the dark. So in this case, it would be the finger. On the other side, if you're doing that against something dark, the cloth here is the pencil. That's sort of a curious thing. It's for you to mess with, think about. But think of your brushes having only one edge. And if you do that, when you're doing a blob of an eye, you can use the one edge to cut that side sharp. So you can set a blob there and cut one edge. And you don't have a problem doing small. You can even use fairly large brushes to do small areas like that. That is what I was showing you in these leaves here. That you can see there's some, and you'll see sketch artists doing this fairly routinely. But you'll see in the leaves in this one, I think it's got to be somewhere in there, that you can see in those leaves that there's a certain amount of edgedness, right? They're not just soft blobs, but there's a little indication of which side leads. And that's all you need. And you can do an eye, but you're suggesting an eye in the same way as any other sketch artist would by articulating the significant part of it. So you have a color blob and you signify the leading edge. Just something that enables sketching way, way better than you might know. So that's a thing about working small. Your brush doesn't have to be teensy and you paint between lines. And if you're always, see, this is a thing about significant line. If you're doing an eye and you just draw your way around everything, instead of blurring your eyes and seeing what you need to draw first, what you need to get set up with, you'll be stuck, So you need to blur your eye. You need to say, what do I essentially draw? And that's why I say there's such a thing as significant line. The sketch artist gets that. And that's a thing you must get as a sketch artist. But the thing about the blurred eye is it really helps you to say, what must I draw? What shouldn't I draw? That's why I recommend you lay in a painting based on the visual order. Lay it in visual order. And you'll realize that what you're doing is you're acting like a sketch artist. This is where I sort of laugh at what Gamble said about Sargent, because it really wasn't him being a sketchy guy. His work isn't sketchy in the end, except when he's trying to be. His work is articulate, but it's articulate in the key places. And so if you want to call that sketchy, sketch-like, that's okay. But it really just only because it comes from, it has elements of the sketch approach, right? The sketch mindset in it. So, all right. So we talked about the eyes. Yeah, and again, if you just know that you're doing a color study, just get the color. Now, I want to mention that just get the color spots and the sort of the amount of them, the proportions of them in a rectangle to be able to see whether you have a good color. That's what a color study is for, to see whether you have a good color scheme. I want to mention that Sargent and Degas both, we've seen studies of their work before, in museums, and they do blob studies of the colors of different pictures of good painters. Now, I don't know if they went in there with little pads or what they had, but you don't see them carefully drawing them. And by the way, all good painters have gone to the museum and drawn more precise copies too. But when they're doing these color studies, you don't see that kind of drawing. They're just trying to set up the color scheme, or the color composition, the color scheme. I mean the distribution as well as the kinds of colors. So think about that for a second. Why are they doing that without drawing little eye bits? Because you can see the color scheme without that tiny amount of without the tiny stuff. The tiny stuff doesn't change the field. The little things like eyes. So if you're really doing a color study, it won't be your concern. On the other hand, the one I showed you, the portrait of the woman with the black behind her, those eyes are blue eyes, and if it's just a portrait, just a head, the blue of the eye will matter. It'll be a factor. And by the way, in 2 seconds, probably something around the lips will be a factor too. Color-wise, I mean. Yeah, I think that's it. And those are my best suggestions. You still are going to have to use a fairly small brush. I do recommend rounds. Rounds have a way of sort of, if you have a decent round, they have a way of at times being a point, but always you can use them to draw one edge, as well as any brush. So you don't have to get in there with a filbert or a flat to draw one edge. The problem with a flat or a bright is that they always cut two sharp edges. And I find that with a round, you can always articulate a sharp edge and drag the other side, if you follow what I'm saying. So you have a way in, if you can use it, if you can sort out how I'm saying to use it. But you have sort of a way in to the leading edge, while not accidentally drawing two sides to something. Yeah. Anyway, that probably doesn't cover all of it, but I just want you not to be confused about whether if you're really doing a color study, you don't need details like that. And you got to know when you're finished, is the color beautiful? And when you're looking at the thing as a whole, is it beautiful? But if you're trying to make art all the time, instead of actually doing a true color studies are for a purpose, right? Why am I doing a color study? The ones I've showed you, I'm doing them to see what the color scheme of a picture that's coming up is, whether it's good or not. You know, and I'm particularly pointing at those ones with the Gamel, these guys here. That's what a color study is. So you're either doing a color study or you're not doing one, but don't call it. Be very specific and discriminating in the kind of words you use, and make sure you know exactly what you mean. You know, when you say color study. All right. Yeah. And then you won't be, trying to kill two birds with one stone, or trying to achieve the unachievable, so we say. All right. I think I'm going to leave it at that. So wish you well, Joshua. Keep it up. And for you all, thank you for your continuing donations and sharing and subscribing and all the rest. Much appreciated, and hope you have a great painting week. And see you next time.